Grammarly can help you write.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for our special event. My name is Katie Porter, and I am Executive Director of Blacklandia Institute, a literary and cultural arts nonprofit based in inland Southern California. Tonight, we present Black in Latin America, which is in partnership with UCR Arts' Third Thursday Talk Series, featuring Dr. Keenan Norris as moderator and distinguished panelists Alex Avila, Malcolm Friend, and Umi Vaughan. Before we begin, Blacklandia Institute respectfully acknowledges and recognizes our responsibility to the original and current caretakers of this land, water, and air, the Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseno, and Serrano peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, the Blacklandia region is home to many indigenous peoples from all over the world, and we express our gratitude to them for allowing us the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. So now I would like to turn it over to Lindsay Hamill to say a few words about UCR Arts and their Third Thursdays Talk series. And from there, we will go right into our program with Dr. Keenan Norris. So welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you, Katie. My name is Lindsay, and I'm the manager of school and volunteer docent programs at UCR Arts. And UCR Arts is the California Museum of Photography and the Culver Center of the Arts in downtown Riverside. We're not open right now, but we look forward to opening hopefully in the next few months, and look forward to doing more of these events within Blacklandia. Thank you so much to all of the participants on this panel for this important conversation. And thank you to Blacklandia for inviting UCR Arts to be partners in this program as a part of our Third Thursday Talk series. We're also thankful for the generous support from the Marjorie and Glenn Thomas Memorial Fund, which makes Third Thursday Talks possible. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Keenan.
All right, so hello everybody. Want to thank the Blacklandia Institute, UCR Arts, for bringing this together. I'm Keenan Norris. I teach American literature and creative writing at San Jose State University. Also a novelist and essayist. My novel Brother and the Dancer came out a few years ago through Heyday Books, and later this year, my novel, The Confession of Copeland Kane, The Confession of Copeland Kane will be published in June. So where to begin? Black in Latin America is the title and the topic of our talk today. And, you know, when reflecting on the topic, it's become clearer and clearer to me that while Black and white bonds are often celebrated in America as an amelioration of the nation's sin of slavery, far less celebrated and far less well known is the history of Black and brown cultural, musical, religious, political coalition. But Black and brown people have shared these troubled lands, the Americas, from the Caribbean to North, Central, and South America for at least as long. In the journal of Bartolomé de las Casas, made during the third voyage of Christopher Columbus in 1498, de las Casas relates that Columbus had heard reports from local people that, quote, there had come to Hispaniola, or the island of Hispaniola, as we call it today, where both the Dominican Republic and Haiti sit, that there had come to Hispaniola from the south and southeast a Black people who had the tops of their spears made of a metal, which they call guanine, quote unquote. We know as fact that 10 times as many enslaved Africans were trafficked to Brazil alone as there were to all of the United States. Similarly, twice as many enslaved Africans were trafficked to the island of Cuba alone as to all of the United States. When I read Dr. Henry Louis Gates, or as many of us in the academy call him, Skip Gates, is Black in Latin America, and also watched the accompanying documentary. It was groundbreaking for me, being from the Inland Empire, growing up in Rialto and Highland, California. I wasn't particularly aware of Afro-Latino culture, or even frankly existence, of Afro-Latino people in my first, in my upbringing. And I didn't realize that this culture, right, this hybrid culture, was all around me. Dr. Gates's work for me, and I think for many African Americans, really opened our eyes to, to this, the vibrant mixing of these cultures. And so in that book, right, the history of Afro-Latin culture is chronicled from Mexico to Peru, Cuba, to the DR, the Dominican Republic, and Haiti. All right, so our three panelists are going to educate us and enlighten us in ways that go well beyond my my mere knowledge. So each panelist is going to begin with a 10-minute talk that they'll give. And after that, we'll segue into a longer discussion with the panelists, and then we'll go to Q&A after that. So I'm going to introduce y'all one at a time, have each person go for 10 minutes, and then introduce the next person, and so forth. So first up, our first panelist is Malcolm Friend. Malcolm Friend is a poet originally from the Rainier Beach neighborhood of Seattle, Washington. He received his BA from Vanderbilt University, where he was the 2014 recipient of the Merrill Moore Prize for Poetry, and his MFA from the University of Pittsburgh. He's the author of the chapbook Mixed Kid Mixtape, and the full-length collection of poetry, Our Bruises Kept Singing Purple, selected by Cynthia Aru King as winner of the 2017 Hillary Gravendike Prize. Malcolm has received awards and fellowships from organizations including Canto Mundo, Backbone Press, the Center for African American Poetry and Poetics, the Frost Place, and the University of Memphis. His work has appeared or is forthcoming in publications including La Repuesta magazine, the Fjords Review, Black American Edition, Vinyl, Word Riot, the Acentos Review, Connotation Press, and Pretty Owl Poetry. He's a poetry editor for Freeze Ray Poetry, and together with J.R. Mahung is a member of Black Plantains, an Afro-Caribbean poetry collective. He currently lives and teaches in Pittsburgh. Malcolm, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
All right, yeah, I definitely should have shortened that bio a little bit.
Yeah, it's all good.
But yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Keenan, for the introduction. Thank you to Katie and Janine at Inlandia, and thank you to Lindsay at UCR Arts for helping to put this event together. And for me, really, the easiest way to introduce myself and my work is to read a poem for y'all. And so I'm gonna read a poem from my debut full length, Our Bruises Kept Singing Purple, which, as Keenan mentioned, was published by Inlandia. This poem does start with an epigraph, which I'll read before reading the title. And I do want to apologize in advance for my singing voice, really cannot sing. And I also want to give a content warning for anti-Black violence. All right. The epigraph is, todo fue una cosa del pueblo, del negro. Clemente empezó a repetir palo y nosotros entramos ahí, tú sabes, con nuestra música. Ismael Rivera. Clemente el sonero mayor, elegy en bomba, hasta Tato la Viera. Mataron al negro bembón, Mataron al negro bimbón. It begins, your voice, scrape of güiro interrupting horns, usually music of energy and shifting feet. Today, Black Spanish notes form noose in reverse. Hoy se llora noche y día, porque negrito bimbón, todo mundo lo quería. What happened to Wekwae Panamio? What happened to the banging baril voice that told us we were beautiful, that Black was beautiful? Esconde la bimba que viene el matón. Esconde la bimba que viene el matón. My feet stumble over these notes I think misplayed, make me misplay, fly balls. Maelo, they tell me a Black boy is dead in Mississippi. Reverse to Black Spanish notes. Huye, huye, que huye Wantón. Mira que por allá viene Panchón. And they wonder why I say I don't want to be treated like a Negro. They kill Blacks in this country, sin causa, sin razón. Call it sheet music to an orchestra we never asked to be part of. Y saben la pregunta que le hizo al matón. Because it's always the same question. Why? What did we do wrong? As if there was any way to change this. As if the answer isn't always the same. Yo lo maté por ser tan bimbón. Y hoy lo lloro, noche y día. Okay. All right, so I thought that I would read the poem before giving any context for it, instead of what I usually do, which is give the context first because it's incredibly important to the poem. So the poem itself is written from the perspective of Roberto Clemente, who was a Black Puerto Rican baseball player for the Pittsburgh Pirates, the city in which I now live. And in the poem, Clemente is speaking back to Ismael Rivera, also known as El Sonero Mayor, or the greatest sonero, and more affectionately known as Maelo to Puerto Ricans, and who was an incredibly influential Black Puerto Rican singer. The epigraph is really what ties the two together. Rivera got his big start as lead singer for the band Cortijo y su Combo, and that band's ascension to popularity coincided with Clemente's rise into the major leagues, which is something Rivera was acutely aware of, and he mentions it in that epigraph that I read. And Cortijo su Combo was known for popularizing bomba en plena, which is Black Puerto Rican music, within Puerto Rico, but also throughout Latin America. So with the band's rise, we see the ways in which different points of the African diaspora merge and support each other. One of their songs, though, was El Negro Bimbón, lyrics for which I use in the poem. And it details a Black police officer who has to investigate the murder of a Black man. And when he asks the murderer, "Why did you do it?" the murderer responds, "I killed him because he had big lips." And it's this extremely deflating song from a band that otherwise is celebrating their African roots. But as usual, that's par for the course. To be Black often simultaneously means we are celebrating our cultures, which denote our very survival, while also mourning the circumstances which have birthed those cultures. What's really haunting for me, though, and this is mentioned in the poem, it's alluded to, is that Clemente's rookie year with the Pirates is 1955, which is the same year that Emmett Till is lynched in Mississippi. And so one of the things that I'm preoccupied with in my own work are the ways in which different Black diasporas intersect. I often think of a line from Teo Calderon's song Mardi Gras, Bob Marley mi psicólogo, Mayelo mi psiquiatra, or Bob Marley is my psychologist, Ismael Rivera is my psychiatrist, which itself is pointing to those connections and intersections. This interest for me is partly biographical. My father is Puerto Rican and Jamaican, and my mother is Black American. And so this is something that I just grew up with, those intersections being something that were constantly on display. And I do want to also touch back on Henry Louis Gates' Black in Latin America as one of the texts that has brought us together today. I actually remember seeing the documentary version of it as a senior in college. I was doing a project for a protest music in Latin America course that focused in part on Brazil and Haiti, two places that are sometimes left out of definitions of Latin America. And what immediately struck me was Gates' decision to focus on Haiti as well, considering not just its proximity, so sharing an island with the Dominican Republic, as Keenan noted, but also its role in the evolution of Black diasporic thought and how the West would have to reckon with it. And for me, one of the biggest parts of that that Gate points out is Haiti's role in what would become what we now know as Pan-Africanism, first stating that Haitians would only be known as Black and not any of the other racial signifiers that denoted a mixing of Blackness with any other race. So things like mulatto, although there are tensions between the population that would be identified as mulatto today. But then he also noted that in the 1816 Constitution, any Black person who came to Haiti would also be recognized as Haitian. And that's not to say that any of that would solve issues of colorism, that it would deal with issues like sexism, or any of the other pitfalls of Pan-Africanism. But I do think that it's a radical notion of solidarity and kinship that also underlines some of my own thoughts with regards to Blackness as something that is global, and the roles that Black people play for each other as a sort of refuge for each other. And with that, I will I will give the mic back.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Malcolm. And next, I think I just want to take a moment between each speaker and just let us all reflect for a moment on, the art and the scholarship and, the knowledge that's being shared. So moving forward to our next panelist, Alex Avila is a native New Yorker. He hails from the Bronx, New York City, a Black Latino Honduran. He explores issues of identity and biculturalism in his works of prose and poetry. He is a Cal State University Creative Writing MFA graduate with a specialty in multimodal digital storytelling. Alex serves as an editor and writer of Ghost Town, the national literary magazine, and is an English professor at Cal State San Bernardino. He was accepted into the Iowa Writers Workshop, one of the top writing programs in the United States, where he studied advanced poetics. In 2006, Mr. Avila attended the University of Iowa on a scholarship in the Department of Social Work. He is a member of the Honor Society of Phi Kappa Phi and Sigma Tau Delta English Honor Society. Mr. Avila has worked with Kirby Hines, playwright and professor from UCR, as a co-writer for Buck World One, Uncovered, a pageant of hip hop masters, as well as Uncovered 2. All right, so with that as introduction, and having had a wonderful conversation with you yesterday, brother, I want to turn the mic over to you.
Yeah. So thank you for that introduction. I appreciate that. I think we have a video. If not, we can go into a poem.
You've got it. I'll get it up.
All right, no problem.
When I was young, I hated school. I mean, I hated school for real. I hated school without passion. My dad, his highest grade he ever completed was the 9th grade. My mom, the highest grade she ever completed was the 6th grade. So when they used to help me with the homework, you know, and this is like in another country, they went to school, right? So, you know, I'm in the Bronx in New York City, St. Mary's Projects, PS5. And I used to help me with this homework. It would be wrong. So when I go to class, the teachers would embarrass me in front of all the students and ridicule me for having my homework wrong. Like I couldn't get it right, like something was wrong with me or something. I mean, after that, I remember they threw me in special ed classes, ESL classes, resource classrooms. And I remember the kids used to just make fun of me, you know, because, you know, those was a class for the slow kids. And negro fail with the slow kids. Well, they didn't really call me slow, they called me retard, actually. That's the retard class. I was just trying to be politically correct, but I might as well just tell you exactly what they called it. So yeah, I mean, they called me retard, you know, because I was in the slow class. And I was an oddball. I didn't fit in with nobody, not the black kids, not the Puerto Ricans, not the Latinos, nothing. I was just the ugly duckling. I was the oddball out. Like at lunchtime, you know, when it was time to eat, you know, you go get your tray, and then the server puts food on your tray, and you know, as soon as the food would hit my tray, the kid will come either behind me or right next to me and take the milk carton, like my milk, and just open it up and then pour all the milk on all my food. Or they'll knock it off my hand and they'll be laughing at me, you know, el negro feo. And yeah, like I would go like the whole day just not eating, like hungry. I wouldn't tell my moms, I wouldn't tell the teachers, I just kept it to myself. Now when I work with students, you know, like I could see the same fears, embarrassment, and alienation in their face. Like I can see it in their eyes. Like I'm like, yo, you know, because there was people, you know, that believed in me, that allowed me to go forward. Now I'm an MFA graduate. You know, published several books. I mean, I traveled the country, and I just want to say thank you. Because of you, I love education, man. Like, I mean, thank you. Thank you very much.
I've been reading books of old, the legends and the myths, Achilles and his gold, Hercules and his gifts, Spider-Man's control, and Batman with his fist. And clearly I don't see myself composing with what she said, where she wanna go, how much she wanna risk. I'm not looking for somebody with some superhuman gifts, some superhero, some fairy tale bliss. Just something I can turn to, somebody I can kiss. I want something just like this. I've been reading books of old, the legends and the myths, the testaments it told, the moon and its eclipse, and Superman arose and stood before he lives. But I'm not the kind of person that asks what she said, where she wanna go.
Yeah, I figured, you know, sharing that video and trying to change the narrative of Black, especially Black men and Black Latino men, um, it starts with you. And the only way, you know, I can complain all the time about the media putting negative images of Black and brown men, but if I don't partake and participate in showing positive messages, we'll never change the narrative. And we can't wait for someone else to change our narrative or tell our stories. So I figured sharing that video, you know, it's just an insight of some of the stuff I've experienced as a Black Latino, my first language being Spanish, and learning English in school. And so those challenges right there is just, you know, unique. So I'm gonna go into this poem, and I wrote this poem when I was in Cal State, because a student approached me and was telling me how, you know, in America, in the United States, you know, when people come to this country, they should be speaking proper English. And I remember being in Gene Delgado's class, and the student didn't know that my first language was Spanish, and it was just, I was just kind of like, what? So anyway, this poem is called Broken English. And I was just like, wow, I can't believe like even now people still have ideas of language and you know, race and how that works in this country. So this one's called Broken English. Con permiso, señor, ¿me puede ayudar a fix my English? It seems I have broken it, como un spell caído, shattered across the nation with my arroz and frijoles and the bitter sazón, corazón. My tongue speaks with flavor. Por favor, excuse phonetically my behavior, for I add the before the S sound, producing S school, S space, S spoon, S sky, S sorry, for speaking with pasión y amor, as a mother sing in their kitchen reciting bachata, señor. Tengo un corazón, boom, boom, motivado de esperanza, de razón. Tienes un tape so I can wrap it around my broken English. I can crazy glue it so my Spanglish don't go spilling out like a cup of sangria. I need to fix it and graduate, dice mi tía Maria, because everybody don't eat fried plátanos and green onions on the side. My red peppers and onions on the side, my Aztec out of white Taino pride need a place to hide. I gotta water down my African blood that rages like the falling river inside. If I could only speak like them, senor, I could fake the funk and my dark skin can get by. And in nombre del Padre and su Espíritu, as I blow up my Virgin Mary candle, senor, I pray that you can help me fix this problema. Because I overheard students in my class say real Americans don't speak broken English. And so at least one poem right there. And yeah, again, that poem is a reflection of a collection of experiences of being, having parents from Central America, Honduras, having your language be Spanish first. And I used to think everybody spoke Spanish because in New York City, when you grow up in the projects, you kind of incubated in your own community. But when you go to schools, when you realize everybody ain't speaking Spanish. So I used to get beat up by the Blacks, Latinos as a kid because, you know, you think, you know, you go see a Black kid named Mike and you're like, kindergarten, like, hey, mi nombre es Alex Avila. Mike is like, yo, Black people don't speak Spanish, and then boom, boom, boom. So I was getting beat up by the Blacks, the Puerto Ricans, because I was an oddball. I didn't fit in anywhere. And so what wound up happening was, I mean, I even hated the color of my skin. I thought I was cursed. But then after a while, I just realized you can't please everybody. And I don't, you know, I think the focus should be how do you empower yourself? And then empowering yourself, you can also empower your communities. And so poetry is one of the ways I actually learned how to write and read English because everything was backwards. And so they say I was dyslexic, you know, that's why they threw me in special ed, but I wasn't. I just saw things differently, linguistically, and how things were on paper, how they sound. And so I used to write poetry to help me understand English. And I used to write my poems backwards. So how I got to understand English was just this, you know, stylistics of just flipping things over and looking things, you know, from multiple angles. And then at the same time, you know, growing up in New York City, I'm growing up in New York City in the Bronx during the crack epidemic, you know, era and the AIDS epidemic era. And so not only am I dealing with the dynamics of language and race, but I'm also dealing with hip hop being birthed, you know, crack needles, crack valves everywhere, you know, people jumping off of 24, you know, people jumping off my building, 21 stories and just hitting right. And you're witnessing all these kind of violence and just kind of, so I'm just trying to figure out how do you survive? And then if you do survive, how do you pass that on and help others coming along who are struggling with similarities? And so, so yeah, that's just my story in that, you know, so I have multiple lenses. I have an academic lens, I have a street lens, I have a hip hop lens, I have a Black lens, a Latin lens. I have multiple lenses, and I learned how to navigate the world through multiple lenses. And that's a tool of survival. And I think you need that today, you know. And I'm pretty sure, you know, W. Du Bois, Dr. Yates, and a lot of these folks, they have to do the same thing. How do you figure out all these lenses? How do you navigate and negotiate that? I'm excited, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. I could do more, talk, but I know my brother Umi's on, so I want to hear what he has to say, and I can't wait for us to have this, open discussion and see what this turns into. So, thank you again for inviting me, and it's an honor to be here and a blessing, and much respect.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. And once again, appreciate the personal, letting us into your personal narrative, your personal story. The vulnerability, right, is very much appreciated. I'm going to now introduce our third panelist. Umi Vaughan is a scholar and artist who conducts research, creates photographs and performances, and publishes work that examines the evolution and meaning of music and dance traditions across the African diaspora. He holds a PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of Michigan and is currently Associate Professor of Africana Studies at California State Monterey Bay. Dr. Vaughan is the author of Carlos Aldama's Life in Bata, Cuba Diaspora and the Drum, as well as Rebel Dance, Renegade Stance, Timba Music, and Black Identity in Cuba. I've known Umi for a minute now. Out here, I now live in the Bay Area, Oakland, California, as does Umi. So welcome.
Thank you, Keenan. Thank you to all of you at the Inlandia Institute and to my fellow panelists. We got Puerto Rico, we got Honduras in the building. Very honored to be here. Thank you again, Keenan. I grew up in the Bay Area in Oakland. Oakland is, a revolutionary city, a mixed city where a lot of different cultures come together. In my household, I heard stories and I read about the presence of Afro-Latino settlers among the first Spaniards to come and settle California. And I heard stories about Puerto Rico and Cuba and the blacks there, but being all the way out here in California, I didn't have very much personal contact. When, as a youth, I went to college at Morehouse in Atlanta, Georgia, I had the great fortune of having a professor by the name of Arturo Lindsay, a Black Panamanian painter who kind of hit me to the different experience of Black Latinos who, as I was a Spanish speaker learning the language, hit me to the different ways that Black Spanish speakers navigate the language, as, African descendants tend to play with language, whichever one it is. He showed me how that works in Spanish and kind of turned me on to Afro-Latino culture. At the end of my time at Morehouse, I took a trip to Mexico, and we spent time in the city of Oaxaca studying literature, etc. But we took some trips as well to the coast, La Costa Chica, that whole territory that ranges from Acapulco all the way down south along the Pacific coast to towns like Puerto Angel and Puerto Escondido, where the Angolans and the Congo people who were brought to Mexico throughout the early 1500s into the early 1600s set down their roots and became the third root, La Tercera Raíz de Mexico. I got a chance to hang out with folks like the Trinidadian Catholic priest, Father Glenn Jamat, who told me about the plight of Afro-Mexicans being, set down there in towns like El Ciruelo or Yanga and having their own culture, but being kind of oblivious or unaware of their kind of larger connection to an African diaspora and African family, sit down in many satellite locations. So that trip to Mexico kind of opened my eyes. I got a chance to participate in what was known as the Encuentro de Pueblos Negros and talk about my identity and experience being from Oakland and how cultural heroes like Huey Newton or Bob Marley or others helped us make sense of ourselves as Black people in a worldwide context. Later, I had the opportunity to travel to Cuba. A brethren from Havana, a great dancer by the name of Jose Francisco Barroso, moved to my neighborhood in East Oakland, you know, and he's asking me about Tupac and about Biggie, and in exchange telling me about Chango and about Elegua and Yemaya and stuff. And we have this kind of exchange going on, and I become a member of his dance company, and we dance and sing and fellowship together. And it's one more reason to kind of understand this special thing that's happening in Afro-Latin America. From there, I had the good fortune to do research also in El Peru to learn about El Cristo Milagroso, the painting created by an Angolan enslaved person in the 1700s, I think, that has become kind of a national symbol of Peru. That's part of a procession that happens throughout Lima every year in October. I got a chance to travel to Colombia and learn about the Black influence on the Caribbean coast in places like Barranquilla and Santa Marta, or in the Pacific Coast region in towns like Buenaventura or Cali or Yolombo and different places. So through all these experiences, I've come to see how there's a special kind of flavor, a special retention, a special extension of African cultural ways that is very, very beautiful. And as an African American person, it's not that, it's not to celebrate a sense of lack, because African Americans, came up with beatboxing and tap dancing and patting juba and all kind of things to substitute the stealing away of the drum. But in places like Cuba, in places like Brazil, in places like Haiti, for various accidents of history, for various forms of resistance, there are cultural traditions that are so rich, that reach back so directly to our African ancestors, that it's a total inspiration. So a lot of my work as an anthropologist, as a percussionist and dancer, as an author, has been about trying to excavate these traditions and kind of share them as points of inspiration for Black youth, as important points for the scholarly record, etc., etc. My most recent research has been in Brazil. A lot of times, just like people don't think of Haiti when they think of Latino, people sometimes don't think of Brazil when they think of Latino, but there's a kind of debate about this, and I would be on the side of both Haiti Chéri and Brasil Bonito, Brasil Lindo are all Latino cultures, as well as strongly African tinged cultures. The most recent research has been about religious racism or religious intolerance, cases where individuals, particularly Protestant evangelicals, Pentecostals, have been targeting the practitioners of African religions, Candomblé, Umbanda, Jurema, and various others, and doing really out-of-pocket, terroristic kind of things, burning down temples, defacing sacred spaces, threatening people, cyberbullying, beating up youth at school, all kind of really foul stuff. And so the research has been about documenting that and trying to figure out ways to put the information in front of the right people in order to affect some kind of change, a stop to this situation. I wanted to show a video that features some Afro-Brazilian drumming that that exemplifies this link of ancient African percussion practices with contemporary communities that are in peril because, you know, folks are trying to call the religious ritual a noise violation, or trying to say that it's devil worship, and they're trying to, you know, undermine society. Really ridiculous stuff. I want to show you guys how beautiful this drumming is, and just give you a taste of the research that we're doing and the traditions that we're trying to protect with this work. This rhythm is called Congo de Oro, the golden Congo, and it's an African rhythm derived from the Congo people who were brought to Brazil.
Yeah, thank you, Umi. Thank you. And once again, I just invite everybody to take a moment and to, to absorb, the thought, the music, the art, and the personal reflections that each of the panelists have already shared with us. I think this first question, which is going to be for Malcolm, dovetails off of something that Umi brought up in terms of the the harassment of Black Latinos and of just kind of vamping down through cyberbullying and so forth. And of course, while this question is directed initially to Malcolm, I would like all the panelists, with each question, to feel free to interject. So, Malcolm, let's talk about current critiques of Latinidad as an ethnic marker. Do you feel that Latinidad perpetuates anti-Black and anti-Indigenous violence? First question. And is this, in your opinion, at all related to the growing number of Black people with origins in Latin America who are no longer identifying as Latinx or Latino, as you would have it?
Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, that, yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly complex question, right? Because on the one hand, Latinidad has sort of served to bring a number of folks together, thinking about the ways in which populations from across different diasporas, different countries, have been brought together by Latinidad as an ethnic marker. But at the same time, it does in many ways perpetuate that sort of anti-Black and anti-Indigenous violence. Thinking about the ways in which it reinforces concepts such as mestizaje, or that mixing that is seen as a sort of foundation of Latin American identity. I know Umi mentioned the different raíces, those different roots that are brought into Latin American cultures. And in like the most positive ways, it can be used to highlight the different contributions that different cultures have made and sort of highlight the contributions of Africans, of indigenous peoples who are often erased from those identities. But it can also serve to sort of bolster falsehoods that there's no such thing as race or racism in Latin America, which we know is not true. Like looking at the lack of representation of Black Latin Americans and Black Latinx people in popular media, looking at, you know, the people who are most often harassed by police in Latin American countries. So yeah, I do think that Latinidad on the one hand can serve as a unifying force for people at times, but it can also very dangerously alienate people. And I do think that that does contribute to the fact that there are now a number of folks who have their roots in, say, Mexico, who have their roots in, say, the Dominican Republic, and who are Black, who do not choose to identify with that marker.
Yeah, that's I think that's a profound reflection. You know, one thing I would like to say to the audience is if you do have questions for the panelists, please put them in the Q&A. We will get to the Q&A eventually, but first we're just gonna talk with each other right now. You know, I was reflecting, I believe, I was reflecting as Alex was speaking about, you know, my first kind of encounters with Afro-Latin culture. And I was thinking, you know what, before Skip Gates, I remember watching the World Cup when I was a teenager and just seeing like, okay, there are the Black soccer players on the field from Ecuador and from Colombia and wherever, but it was the fans in the stands. When I saw all these Black folks, you know, representing Ecuador, representing Mexico, representing, as I said, you know, Colombia and so forth, right, in the stands, I was like, you know what, I think there's Black people out there. And so, you know, and, but growing up on the West Coast, we're not really exposed to that. Alex, when we were speaking yesterday, you told me that you were Cal State San Bernardino's first Afro-Latin English major, at least at the graduate level. And so there is, you know, definitely, while, you know, as you explained, you faced a lot of discrimination on the East Coast because of your mixed or hybrid identity. You know, on the West Coast, I feel like we're even a few steps slow of that. Oftentimes, unfortunately, we're not even aware, and not just Black folks, right? Not just Black folks, but a lot of Latinx identifying people as well are unaware of this, you know, of the presence and the, you know, Afro-Latino people. And so I guess, could you just speak on that East Coast, West Coast, those differences in the communities and so forth?
Yeah, in the East Coast, especially New York City, and shout out to St. Mary's Project where I was, where I'm from, in the BX. A lot of what brought us together, you know, had to do with class. When you had extreme poverty, because that's, you know, when you live in extreme poverty, you find creativity comes out of a lot of different places. And even in the book, Black in Latin America, a lot of those influences did come to the Bronx, Capoeira. You know, when we had dudes who were literally shooting at each other just a couple of weeks ago who are battling through dance. And the stands, you know, they start doing these moves and start flipping, and he's like, yo, what's that? You know, that's capoeira, but in back we call it hip, you know, breakdancing, pop locking, right? So that influence, right? You was playing the drums earlier, Brother Umi, and Garifuna, you know, a lot of this African drums traveled into our language as far as the beatbox, you know, and you know, folks, dudes be in the building banging on the window, and I literally grew up seeing music, art, graffiti, hip, all that just kind of just everywhere on the trains, going to school, So it lived, it was a living body. And a lot of that was from Brazil, Haiti, a lot of that traveled into the Bronx and became this entity. You saw it in reggae, you saw it in a lot of these other elements, but what brought us together, so when you saw Puerto Ricans, they were with us in the parks, literally breakdancing, and it was nothing about them being Puerto Ricans. It was like, yo, whoever was the best was the best. It had nothing to do with their pigmentation. When I come to the West Coast, pigmentation is at a whole nother, it's like, it's over materialized. It's like, it's overemphasized and it's overrated. And so what happens is when we come here, what I notice is how the institutions like school, jails, religion separate people here. And also the land and space. Like the West Coast is it's just spread out. And my building in New York City, it's 21 stories. There's 550 people live in one building. There's 4 buildings. There's over 2,000 people live in one block. We ain't got time to go back and forth about your skin color. Either you in, you out. So the way our framework works, because we're so close in proximity, and of course dealing with class, there's very few things that we emphasis or stress about. So in the West Coast, because time and space is different, and also ignorance, because that's the privilege. You don't have to be on top of each other. You don't even need to know your neighbor in the West Coast. I know people out here who don't even know the person right next to them. In the Bronx, you better know somebody next door if you need that sugar, if you need help with picking up the kids from school. We have to communicate in the East Coast because of the way it's set up. In the West Coast, you don't. I see you when I see you type model. So I don't know if that makes any sense. But yeah, and then I was number 11. So number 11 is, I had a administrator at Cal State. She said, yeah, you're number 11. And I was in grad school. I was at number 11 of what? She said, you're the 11th Black male we've had in the graduate English program in 20 years. I was like, God, and you're the only Black Latino male we've ever had in the grad program. I was like, wow. And so and y'all educators, y'all know, when y'all in the classroom, you don't see Black males. Imagine coming across a Black Latino. It's like, what? That's like, because we're not in the school system, we're somewhere else. And we're trying to figure out how to navigate that now, because, different times ask for different measures. But to your point, Keenan, yeah, the West Coast dynamics and the East Coast dynamics are extremely dramatic because of space and time and literally class. So in the East Coast, you have to make friends quick or you're not going to survive. And the transportation system is also part of that. Where in the West Coast, you need a car. You need to move around. So a lot of that infrastructure plays into how we coexist in space. So even to this day in the West Coast, even though I'm not Mexican, they still call me Mexican. Because in their minds, either you're Mexican or you're not. So either Mexican, white, or Black. So even the categories are limiting in the West Coast. Where in the East Coast, we know a Jamaican when we see a Jamaican. We know Haitian, like even the way they use words and how they move, and like we identify like, okay, that person. So our cultural awareness is hyper hypersensitive in the East Coast. Over here it's turned off. That thing is like, yeah, you fit in this one of these 3 boxes, and that's how we move in the West Coast. It's a fascinating dynamic for me to be a part of it, to learn. Even my wife, I'm 14 years married. She still calls me Mexican. And at this point, I'm not even gonna fight. It's like, whatever, you know what? I'm Black. I'm gonna adopt a Black Mexican at this point. Her dad calls me Mexican. I stopped fighting that. I was like, you know what? It's cool. All right, I'm Mexican. So, and I'm West Coast. I'm Mexican in the West Coast. When I'm back in the East Coast, I'm Garifuna. I'm Black, Latino. I'm all that. Over here, I'm just Black Mexican. You know what?
She didn't even call you Puerto Rican. She didn't even call you Puerto Rican, bro.
They don't even know what that is. That's an extra spice. Too much on the port. Besides Jennifer Lopez, you're doing way too much on that Puerto Rican over here. But great question. Yeah. Go right ahead.
Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in on that? East Coast and West Coast and differences in just the like kind of knowledge of awareness of Afro-Latin existence and culture?
I think where on the West Coast where we might be more savvy in that way is Asian and Pacific Island cultures, right? So everybody got the Vietnamese homie and the Cambodian gangster homie, you know what I mean? All like that. Keenan, you know this about me that I'm a big devotee of Walter Mosley, and in a lot of his novels, he touches on that point of, you know, for the brothers, everybody is Mexican if they're speaking Spanish. So for me as a, you know, a lover of Spanish language, that's always been a funny thing for me to navigate, being able to understand and hear the differences and be like, no, that's not Mexican. That's not Mexican, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and this is hilarious, first of all. Yeah. I mean, that's just making me think of this comedian that I saw in somewhere in Southern California once that you know, in New York, he was from New York, and he said, in New York, we got Cubans and we got Jamaicans and Cubans and Dominicans and this, and he said, in California, y'all just see Mexicans and Mexicans and Mexicans, right? It's unfortunate, right? Because it does like kind of smooth over all this cultural difference and richness, right? It's like we came across the country and it all got kind of smoothed out, right? Okay, so the third question does go to you, Umi. Please tell me more about Black Brazilian and Black Cuban musicians doing their thing today. A lot of us are just gonna, you know, don't know until you show us. And so who are some great stars, bands, songs? What can we find on Spotify?
All right on. Well, to just take it back a little bit, I like to always big up a book that really was enlightening to me. It's called Sinful Tunes and Spirituals by a scholar named Dana Epstein. In that book, she's documenting African American music during the colonial era and up into the Civil War. She's showing how the music happening in the Virginia colony and the Georgia colony was the same as what was going on in Haiti or going on in Cuba or going on in Brazil, but that the wave of evangelical proselytizing at the end of the 1700s served to eradicate a lot of that. And she documents instances of like the master fiddle player or the master drum maker in some community writing a letter saying he's going to burn his instrument because it's the devil's work, it's the devil's box, and that kind of a thing. And how by breaking that one link in the chain, it kind of served to derail certain African and certain rooted traditions and stop them from going forward and reaching till today. So, you know, whereas in Brazil you have candomblé up until today, or in Cuba you have santeria and palo and, you know, arara and everything else, in the United States we had to kind of move in a different way for specific reasons. So the contemporary musicians in places like Havana, Cuba, in places like Salvador da Bahia, Brazil, or Cali, Colombia, are on one hand exposed sometimes to conservatory music training and contemporary influences from around the world, including the US, funk and hip hop, but they're also kind of recipients of old traditions coming from their grandparents and their forepeople that like serve as a different kind of you know, place to reach into to create today. You know, so when you step into the cipher and you're gonna create, you have a very deep source to reach into. And so when I think of contemporary Cuban music to really check for, there's a band called Havana de Primera, led by a luminary brother named Alexander Abreu. He's been playing on a high level since I think the late 80s, early 90s, but has more and more come into his own. He founded this band about 10 years ago now, I think, but it's cutting edge. It incorporates influences from classical music, from funk and hip hop, from Brazilian music, everything, but always with a Cuban feel. never hesitating to draw in elements of Orisha stuff and so on. You know, don't let him reach to Honduras and there'll be some Garifuna business up in there, you know, really. Another reference point band from Cuba is called Los Van Van. The amazing thing about this group is that it was founded in 1969 by a great musician named Juan Formel, and innovative music, you know, incorporating synthesizers and different stuff that hadn't been there before, but they've maintained a level of popularity until this day that's unprecedented. So there's something like maybe Earth, Wind, and Fire, if Earth, Wind, and Fire still was #1 on the charts. You know what I mean? Like reaching from way back when until today. On the Brazilian tip, I think of musicians like Seu Jorge, a great black actor and composer with a wide range of styles from samba to funk. I think of a band called Baiana System, which goes into reggae and electronic music, very eclectic. Also, I think of Carlinhos Brown. This like a Brazilian way of saying Charlie Brown, and this guy is an amazing composer. I was fascinated with something he says is that he believes that songs exist all the time and they kind of are hanging in the ether for the composer to kind of distill them for people to enjoy. So he's been a master of that since the 70s. And then speaking of Colombia, there's a band that I love called Herencia de Timbiquí from that Pacific Coast region. They blend curulao with salsa and hip hop and all kind of stuff. A musical mix that you can't stop dancing to.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, other panelists, feel free to jump in and say a bit more. Yeah, Alex?
You know, one of the things I talked about this with you yesterday, Brother Keenan, in New York City, when salsa was and merengue was moving, the artists like Celia Cruz, Tito Puente, they highlighted that the instruments and the sound came from Africa. So you was conscious because they told you in the music that this was African. The drum is African, the melody is African, the swing, all that is African. I mean, Hector Lavoe, I mean, you name, I mean, legend. And he told you Africa was the core of where music all comes from, right? And they were never shy to say that. And I find it fascinating that the music that's coming now, that's absent. Maybe it's me. I mean, tell me, am I wrong? This is open for discussion.
Going to our expert here. All right, so I think this is just rich and ongoing discussion. I want to go to a couple. Let me say once again to the audience, if you do have questions, please pose them in the Q&A. I'm going to go to some of those questions now. So Kelly Dorch asks, do you think the hyper awareness of pigmentation on the West Coast might be related to the film industry here and or the geographic proximity to Africa and greater numbers of higher pigmented people on the East Coast? So I suppose that goes to you first, Alex, but these questions are for everybody on the panel.
Shout out to Kelly Dorch. She run one of the biggest departments at CSU, B level studies. Big props to her for being here. Hyperpigmentation, and that's been a media. So in the book in Black in Latin America talks about how the lack of ownership of media. So the fact that we don't own media anywhere, I don't care if it's in South America, Central America, or North America, they get to rewrite the narrative and erase us from history. And so that is indoctrinated in the school system as well. So when we read the text and look at you, anywhere you go, we're absent. So it's not just Hollywood and entertainment, but it's also in academia, it's also in the literature, it's also in religion. So when you look at everything we're surrounded by, because we don't own any of it, they get to rewrite it and then take us out of it. So we have to find ways to discover our own lineage and our own participation in that. And so that's a process. And yeah, I'll let the other panelists talk, but great question, great question.
Well, on one hand, I don't know if you guys, in the wake of the whole controversy over the last couple of weeks with the British Crown, and they're worried about the royal baby, what color and thing. There was a meme that said, well, throughout Latin America, people are also worried about what color the baby is going to be, right? And so I think that, whether it's Mexican culture or El Salvador culture, whatever culture of Latin America, that's a big part of it. And so this, color consciousness that's coming up in this question is really tied to that too. A strong color consciousness, this notion, as they say, of adelantar la raza, to push the race forward, and meaning to lighten one's skin, so to marry up or lighter, like that kind of a thing. And so the preference, the awareness of color is part of that color complex that's in Latin America too.
Yeah. And Malcolm, I don't want to move on to give you a chance to speak as well.
Yeah, no. I mean, for me too, like growing up in Seattle, completely different animal. Like even some of the stuff that you see on in California gets even heightened just because the Pacific Northwest is a lot whiter. Seattle being one of the whitest major cities in the country. So I think that also plays into some of that hyper awareness, is that if you are someone who is a person of color, you stand out because you are few and far between. And then it does become, this trying to fit people into boxes because there isn't as much awareness on the fact that Blackness is something that is not confined to the US. And so, someone sees me, they don't necessarily know that I'm Puerto Rican, or you don't even necessarily know that I'm Jamaican. And so it does become, in part, just a game of the demographics. Someone growing up in New York, there will be some of that confusion, as Alex has pointed out. But there are also communities where you can be like, I'm Honduran, you're Honduran, and we both Black as well. And don't necessarily have to worry about that as much, though it is still an issue. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents coming from the Northwest.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, if I could come back to you for the next question, Malcolm. Susan Christensen, and don't worry, Champagne, we're going to get to your question as well. But Susan Christensen asks, I teach middle school Spanish, and a lot of my students are heritage Spanish speakers. Besides your poems, are there other Spanish-speaking poets or resources you would recommend? Gracias de antemano, or I probably said that wrong. Anyway, you talk.
Okay. So there are a bunch of really, really great poets coming out of Puerto Rico right now, especially. And I say that because I am very, very biased in that regard. But yeah, I see Willie Perdomo's name coming up in the chat too. Great poet. But yeah, I mean, one of the folks who I am thinking of right now, just off of, and who has a lot of work that we could draw on, is Mayra Santos Febres, Black Puerto Rican poet, and amazing, just standard bearer for poetry, for Black Puerto Rican culture. Yeah, so like really someone who you could turn to there. I always go back to Tato Laviera as one of my bigger influences, who was someone that really helped me build my work in terms of thinking about the way in which Blackness is transnational, the way in which Black people come together across cultures. But yeah, I mean, I could keep going and going. I'm pretty sure there are some names that Alex has as well. So I will let Alex speak on that.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
You know, the truth. So this the academic version of poetry that I learned in school. But before that, how I got introduced to poetry was the crackheads in my who went to jail, people who were coming out of prison, who were writing poetry and they were sharing it on the block. So my first encounter with poetry was in St. Mary's. This ex pimp, ex crackhead Blue. He would sit us down once a month or once a week and just read poetry to us. And we've never heard like I've never. And for me, I think legends, people that we'll never know, are people like in these neighborhoods, in these communities that don't have access to media or way to publish. They're way much better than, and they're doing things that probably won't happen for another 5, 10 years when we're talking about art form and media. And so for me, poetry, it starts in my house. My mother's tongue is poetic to me. Um, my brothers down the street, when they holler at each other, that's poetry to me. The way somebody moves, that swagger is poetry to me. The language of romance, when the Puerto Ricans run that, that is poetry to me. So a lot of poetry that I see is in my neighborhood, and that I embodied. And so when I read Shakespeare, I interpret that and break that down from my neighborhood versus this neighborhood. You know, I can understand it from the lens of my context where I grew up, that was poetic, and my first teacher. So when I come in academia, I can understand it from those places and how things move. So yeah, Willie Perdomo's one. Um, because I saw you write that there in the chat, Yumi. I got a list. I got a library. I must have hundreds, if not thousands, of books of poets, writers, musicians. But anyway, I'm not gonna belabor it. But yeah, this is first. I want to say poetry started in my house with my mother, my grandmother, my brothers, and then my neighborhood, and then everything else came second. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and so I want to move on to Champagne Ford's question. Are any of you all planning to travel to Latin America in the near future? If so, what's the first country on the list? Umi, I know you just got back actually from Brazil, so maybe I'd start with you, talk about where you've been lately, where you might be going.
Yeah, I just came back from Brazil. I was there for a month in Brasilia, the capital, in Salvador, my other city, my other hometown, and then also in Maceió, which is in the state of Alagoas, where the famous Quilombo or runaway slave settlement of Palmares is located. I was able to walk in Zumbi's footsteps. He was one of the warrior defenders of the runaway slave settlement that lasted for about 100 years and had as many as 25,000 inhabitants. It was so good to me, y'all. I'm about to go back shortly to do a little bit more research. The research is an important thing for me, but I think there's also something kind of soul replenishing to the lifestyle of the place, America is good for, some of the comforts and stuff that we have, but America is a little ill too. So it feels good to step outside of it into Afro-Latin America, in this case, Brazil. And I'm about to go back in a week or so.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And Alex or Malcolm, Champagne's question. Are you planning to travel to Latin America?
Yeah, we are. I have to. I have a son that's 3, and he needs to know where his grandparents come from. 80% of my family comes from Honduras, Central America, Garifuna people. And when they migrated to the United States, the first place they went was New York City, and then the next place was Texas, and then Florida, Boston. But New Orleans, and so yeah, we are going. Mexico. Shout out to my also a father figure to me, David Kalki, who was a mentor and not only that, but also a father figure as well. He's in Mexico right now in Guadalajara, so we got to go see him. This pandemic shutdown has been crazy. It stopped a lot of movement and a lot of and it's just been challenging to travel and the paradox there. So now we definitely gonna be traveling, and things are opening up now. So I'm anxious, and so first we got to hit up. I got to go back to New York and hit up my Texas. Hit up my folks, and then yes, I'm going back to Honduras, kicking it over there. We have land over there that we want to cultivate and use and educate folks on. Um, and so my wife's a nurse practitioner, and we want to see if we can introduce some type of medicine or some way, ways to coexist in these communities that don't have hospitals. And I want to introduce texts and books. So yes, we got a whole agenda and scholarships opportunity that we want to give out for folks. So yes, we will be traveling Mexico, Honduras, all through that. Yes.
Thank you. And Malcolm, yes, no.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still very nervous about traveling right now. I don't know when that anxiety will lift for me. But one of the things that on sort of the opposite end of what Alex was talking about, one of the things that my siblings had been talking about a couple years ago was trying to get my dad back to Puerto Rico at some point, because he hasn't been back since like the 70s. And so, yeah, we definitely want to get back to him, get him back there. And for us, for me at least, the last time that I was in Puerto Rico, I was mostly around the capital, which is not where my family's originally from. So definitely want to see where my dad is originally from down in the South.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's, whole conversation is making me reflect on, different of my experiences. I see on this call is a former student of mine, Derek Newton. Derek was part of a couple study abroad groups that we, and both Alex and Umi both know about the study abroad program that I helped to facilitate at Evergreen Valley College that was taking, primarily Black and Latino students to different parts of Central America and the Caribbean that with heavy Afro-Latin influence, because that's so, the awareness of such is, so absent on the West Coast. Definitely wanted to expose students to that. And, and that's, you're saying, Alex, that, you're from Garifuna people, right? And it was just really interesting when we went to Belize to see the contrast in Belize City of the, as they say, they're the Creole, they're more like kind of Westernized, Americanized Black folks there. And, frankly, a lot of the rough, circumstances that people are living in, and then you go out into the, Garifuna areas and people are like living a lot better. It was very, very enlightening to see that, because that, again, that's like not something that's going to be shown to, in American media. Let me move into a couple other questions. Let me see. So this is not so much particularly pertaining to, the Black experience of the Black Latin experience, but somebody has asked about Latinx. I don't know if that's a question anybody here wants to speak to. Alex.
Yeah, this Latinx thing, when I heard, I was like, y'all gotta stop. We gotta stop. We're over labeling. At some point, we need to get back to the origin, because we just move further and further and further away. And a lot of that comes from political senses, right? Academic, it comes from a lot of different angles. And so for me to say I'm Black is political, right? That's a political move. Some of my Garifuna family members is like, don't say you Black, say you Garifuna, be proud. But I gotta say I'm Black, because that's the reality of the world I'm in, and I gotta acknowledge that. And I teach my son he's Black. He's also Latino, and we're not doing the Latinx thing over here. We're just gonna say you Black, Latino, you Garifuna. And for folks who don't know what Garifuna are people who came and merged together over 500 years ago, and they still speak the language of 500 years. Garifuna is also a language. There's also people out of Waka mixed with African, right? People who've been outcasted. and these people merged together to form this community called Garifuna. And they've never been enslaved, right? These are free people. So the mindset of Garifunas are a lot different. And it's not saying that we're better, never better, because we still struggle with a lot of the elements, a lot of folks do. But when it comes to all these labels, at some point I'm like, miss me. You know, even Bebop, whatever that thing is, what they talking about, Bebop, BIPOC, I don't
Yeah,
know.
BIPOC, yeah,
But
yeah.
and I'll be looking, and then they present it. I say, stop. You keep coming
Mhm.
up with more names. When we just gonna respect the names where we have, where we come from? When we just gonna acknowledge that, you know? So my attitude over Latinx is overrated for right now. You know, that's just mine.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I would, yeah.
my fault. And I forgot to say this. And it's crazy because I opened up the Pan African Center, the Latinx Center, the Asian Pacific Center, and the Native American Center at Cal State San Bernardino. So even
Mhm.
though for me personally, but I understand some folks may see it as important. So
Mhm.
I'm not gonna belittle or lessen someone else's experience because that's what they want to do. So I've opened, I'm a co-founder of those centers. And so just personally for me, you know,
Right.
I'm good. I just wanted to put that out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. And yeah, I mean, I think as far as BIPOC goes, I won't speak on the Latinx thing, but BIPOC, yeah, I mean, I think that there's so much, again, richness and diversity in all of our experiences and cultures. And there are all kinds of places where they organically connect already without a name, and have for hundreds of years, thousands of years in some cases. I don't really think, all the acronyms are always necessary. All right, so I've got one more question for the panel. What are some ways that Black Latin culture is becoming more prominent in America? What are some ways that Black and Latino people are linking up today?
I would say music, to return to music, the popularity of reggaeton, for example, is a place for folks to look at an artist and be like, damn, he has dreads, but he's speaking Spanish. What's happening? And, allow their curiosity to, you know, take them further and see, who is Tego Calderon, or before that, what was dancehall reggae en español in Panama, and, where is Portobello and Colon, and why are the people there Black Spanish speakers, and kind of get into all those kind of questions. So music is one area where that's coming up. Also, and unfortunately, the kind of ascendancy and aggression of white supremacy and terrorism just hitting different communities is like, okay, oh damn, that's some cornbread American US Black folks. Okay, oh damn, some Asians got hit up. Oh, some Puerto Ricans now. You know what I mean? Like it seems like community by community is getting exposed to that violence, and it's a kind of a roll call of ethnicity too,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Yeah. Um,
Oh,
oh yeah, go on. Yeah, yes, please.
George Floyd, I know we haven't mentioned him and a lot of the Black Lives Matters, the second resurrection of Black Lives Matter that took place last year has opened up dialogue um, all over the world. I was in conversation with people in in Spain. I was in conversation with people in Australia. I don't know about y'all, but it's just been fascinating that people have been kind of interested in this conversation of, well, what does it mean to be Black, different? Um, and so I only bring that up because, this last semester, one of the students, they kind of was like, yeah, I was saying one of my poems, and one of my poems, I talk about the first Mexican was Black. Yanga there's a statue, and there's a whole, the first Mexican was Black, and they looking at me like, they thought I was crazy. And I'm like, nah, the first Mexican was Black. I'm pretty sure of that. That's in the history books. It's written, and Yanga was the first city ever established. And so they were interested because of what happened with George Floyd, and they were more curious. So my students and even people are treating me different. I don't know about you, but even colleagues are treating me different. Have I said something racist in the past? And you know, even so, younger people, I think, are at the forefront of moving this thing forward. And I think a lot of the mixing and the all that's happening right now, house parties, because we're shut down. But one thing, once things open up, it's going to be in the clubs, it's going to be in the music, it's going to be everywhere you go. This thing, the sense of bringing people together and talking about one's blackness, talking about one's Latino-ness, or one Asian, all that is just going to start coming out. Because we're anxious to touch each other, to hug each other. We miss that. And in that, that conversation is going to happen. Healing, I hope some part of it. But yeah, I think it's going to happen sooner than later.
Yeah, let me actually thank you. And let me actually get to one more question real quick. Kelly Dorch asks, how do we raise the profile and make visible the Afro-Latin woman? And I do want to just point out real quickly that we did intend to have women on this panel as well. Among them, Kylie Guyton Acosta of UC Santa Barbara, who has expertise in Cuban music and dance, music and dance as well. But let me pose the question to the panel. How do you raise the profile and make visible the Afro-Latin woman?
Yeah, Brother Michael?
I mean, I think that's a question that gets really at questions of misogyny throughout our culture, right? Like, how do we raise the voices of women? Obviously, it does start in events like this, trying to make sure that there are, women on those panels. But yeah, I think it's a really difficult question. It's one I'm grappling with as well. Noting that my own privilege as a man here, and thinking about sort of the ways in which that question, it reflects the issues with misogyny, the issues with gender that we have throughout our society. And I know that that's not at all an actual answer. It's really more of a cop-out than anything else. But yeah, just thinking about the ways in which I myself am still struggling with that, and trying to know when it is my place to sit down and listen as opposed to take up space and speak.
I'd like to give a shout out to Katie. So when she started the Blacklandia, and folks may not be aware, a lot of the people actually behind the scenes and moving a lot of stuff and actually setting up some of the events have been Black women and Black, professionals and professors and artists. So, in fact, I got invited by a Black artist, a Black author, female, to be a part of the first event that took place last year. So I like to give a shout out to Katie Porter, who's opened up the platform for these kind of conversations to happen. So are there conversations with Afro-Latino women? We're looking for them. So that thing is open, facts, right? My fault. Did you want to say something, Brother Umi?
Well, I just wanted to highlight a couple things I've been aware of recently. If you look online on Facebook, en el Facebook, tú puedes ver a great scholar by the name of Zaire Dinze, Dominicana Puertorriqueña. And she has a thing where she has a bunch of Afro-Latina scholars kind of responding to kind of just questions that are often posed to Afro-Latin women from their perspective as just women and as scholars. So Zaire Dinze, she's a scholar of like public space and such. There's also Josiana Arroyo, a Puerto Rican scholar. Francia Marquez comes to mind. She's a Afro-Colombian activist from the town of Yolombo in near Cali, Colombia. She was a Goldman Prize winner. The Goldman Prize is something like the Nobel Prize, but for environment-related activism. She led a march of women from her town to the capital of Bogota to protest the violent intervention of corporations abetted by the Colombian government, disrespecting the land rights of blacks in the valley region of Colombia, killing people, all kind of crazy stuff. And so she's been such a soldier and such a dedicated activist who's leading, as a Afro-Latin woman, important conversations. So those are just some people who just immediately come to mind.
I also want to also highlight, and he's right. To be a Black Latina in this climate, you are a superstar. Because you're not going to find because the sexism and the way that machismo culture works, try to find one going to school. When I was teaching in high school, I had 3 Black Latinas who dropped out because their parents told them, you know what, your best bet is to find somebody like a man to take care of you. And I was advocating for them to be, go to college, build a career, right? And they were Hondurans. You don't find that. And so ask yourself as educators, have you come across Black Latinas or Black, is that even, are you even, and then what are they doing, right? Are they transcending and going into master's program, graduate programs? So our goal, as a community organizers, I'm trying to fight that, and we need help. We need help trying to educate and encourage people to go to college, go into the arts, get into these professions, because we don't see them, Kelly. The truth be told, it's hard to find. And if we do see them, how to keep them interested and engaged. That machismo culture, boy, it's heavy. My mom's had to fight my dad to get work. My dad was like, I'm the breadwinner. My mom's like, no, we have to help. We got to survive. Everybody got to work. We're a team. And that took years for my father to turn around and say, yeah, I need help. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And, there's, this is a conversation that could go on endlessly. I believe we're supposed to be wrapping up at 8:30. So I'm gonna, we're a couple minutes over. It's all good. It's a lively conversation. I do want to direct everybody in the moment we have left to the chat, where all the panelists have been posting some, wonderful information. And with that, I'd like to once again thank Malcolm Friend, Alex Avila, and Umi Vaughan, as well as the Inlandia Institute and UC Riverside as well. Thank you.
Well, that was such a wonderful discussion. I think we could have kept going another, 30 minutes, hour, but we'll have to have you guys back. So thank you all for being here, especially to our panelists and our partners. And if you want to learn more about these events, do sign up for our e-newsletter. The link is in the chat, and I'll also send it in a follow-up to everyone who is here tonight. So thank you for being here, and we hope to see you again sometime. Have a great night.